Mike Johnson wondered what he would find when he finally returned to the house he shared with his wife Amy, a woman he hadn't heard from in over a year, even though she knew where he was. Looking out the taxi window, he remembered his life. He lost both his parents at the age of 17 in a tragic car accident and became an emancipated minor thanks to the support of his neighbor, who worked as a social worker in the county. Luckily, his parents left him a trust fund to secure his future. It was not a huge amount of money, but enough to meet his needs. He was also in excellent physical condition and played football at school. He was popular among his classmates because he owned his own house, paid for by an inheritance, and was considered a polite and friendly guy. His father taught him to be a gentleman with women and to control his temper. When his father died, he was a hand-to-hand combat instructor and taught Mike well. He graduated from high school and entered the University of Florida. In his third year, he met Amy, who was in her second year. They dated several times, but Mike felt like something was missing, so he didn't call her after the third date. About 2 weeks later, she called herself. "Hi, Mike," she said. "How are you? I haven't heard from you for a long time. Something happened." "I don't know, Amy," he replied. "I just don't think we're right for each other, you know?" "That's not true, Mike," she said disappointedly. "I think we're great for each other. Please, let's try again." "Okay, I'll think about it," he replied. A week later, he asked her out again. This date was completely different. They continued dating until Mike graduated from university with a degree in economics. On the evening of his graduation, he proposed to Amy and she accepted. The wedding was scheduled after her graduation. He stayed in the area to be near Amy and took a job at a local investment firm. They got married in March 2001. At the time, he was 22 and she was 21. Everything was going great, but in September, the world changed. On September 12, 2001, Mike joined the Army. Thanks to his father's training and constant martial arts practice, he became a ranger. At this time, they were a happy new couple living in the house he had inherited from his parents in Columbus. Amy managed to get a job in the city as an assistant lawyer. By the time his training was completed, the U.S. was already involved in Iraq, and he was sent on a 12-month tour. A month after the start of the tour, he was promoted to sergeant and appointed squad leader. After this tour, he returned home, but 9 months later, he was sent back to Iraq for a 12-month tour. By this time, he had signed a contract to reserve and received a promise that after returning from Iraq, he would be able to choose his duty station. Predictably, Amy was unhappy. "Why do you have to come back?" she asked. "I need you here." "Sorry," he said. "I was given an order. I also want to stay here with you, but I have no choice." He hugged her while she cried on his shoulder. "After this tour, I can choose my next assignment," he said, hoping he could keep his promise. They made love. Mike didn't know that this would be the last time he would be sexual with her. 3 days later, he was in Iraq. For the first month, he received a letter from Amy every other day. He called whenever he could and always answered letters. But after the first month, he only received 1 letter over the next 6 months and was only able to talk to her on the phone twice. What the hell is going on, he wondered. After almost 8 months with little contact with Amy, he was worried, but there was nothing he could do. So, like many others, he was counting down the days until the end of the tour. One Tuesday morning, his Humvee was hit by an wide, killing the 4 soldiers in the vehicle. As a result of the explosion, he lost the lower part of his left leg. 3 hours after the attack, the helicopter was able to land and evacuate all the victims. He was given a primary dressing and sent to Ramstein, Germany, for further operations and rehabilitation. After spending 3 months in Germany, he was sent to Walter Reed Hospital for further operations, rehabilitation, and installation of a prosthetic limb. It took another 2 months to learn to walk with the prosthesis. After that, he was discharged for medical reasons and sent home. Despite all his efforts, he heard nothing from his wife. By this time, it had been over a year since he last communicated with her. Is she even alive? He asked himself. And if she's alive, then why didn't she contact him? He tried calling her parents, but got no answers. I called home and left messages. At least the electricity in the house was still working, which meant someone was there. It was around 9:30 a.m. when the taxi stopped in front of the house where they lived. His truck was still in the driveway, as was her car. He also noticed several other cars parked along the curb. The taxi driver helped him carry his bag to the door after he pulled his large 6'2" frame out of the small car. He heard noises coming from the living room and wondered what was going on. Carefully opening the door, he entered the living room and was shocked. His wife is cheating on him. Mike recognized them because he had seen them on base before, and two of them were back in the US when he arrived in Iraq for his second tour. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he shouted. "So this is what you've been doing for the last 13 months. Is this why you couldn't write or answer my calls? I lose my leg and you sleep with everyone in town. Get out of my house. You have 10 minutes to pack your things and get out." Then she recognized him. She extended her hand to him, but he retreated. "Get your dirty, cheating paws off me," he ordered. She stepped back, scared. "Please, Mike, let me explain," she begged. "It's not what you think." "Are you fucking serious?" he asked. "I haven't heard anything from you for over a year, and when I return home, I find you cheating. There's nothing to explain here. Pack your things and leave." Having said this, he came up with another thing. He went into their bedroom, took her clothes out of the closet, including her wedding dress, and threw them out the window. He then went to her bag and pulled out the ATM card from their joint account and the credit card they shared. He also took the house key from her ring. He went outside, taking out a lighter. "What are you doing?" Amy asked in fear. "You have 10 minutes to pack your things and leave, otherwise I'll burn everything," he said. "Come on, move." Amy ran around the house, gathering her things. Mike kept track of the time with his watch. She gathered the last of the things from the ground just as Mike was about to set them on fire. "Where should I go?" she asked through tears. "Right now, I don't care," he said. "As far as I'm concerned, you could be going straight to hell. Just tell me where you'll be living so I know where to send the divorce papers." "Please, Mike, you have to believe me. This was the only time. It was an accident. It didn't mean anything," she pleaded. But Mike didn't believe her. "Bullshit," he said. "I haven't heard anything from you for months. What I saw in the house was clearly not your first time. I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. Now go away, damn it." Amy sobbed as she got into the car and drove away. Mike watched her leave, then returned to the house, depressed. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and collapsed onto the couch, his leg aching. He couldn't believe what she did to him, to them. He lost track of time, and when he woke up, the sun had already begun to set. He stood up and looked around the kitchen for something to eat when the phone rang. "Hello," he said, answering the call. "Mike, what the hell have you done?" An angry female voice came from the other end. He recognized the voice of Julie, Amy's older sister. "Why did you kick Amy out of the house?" "Ask her," Mike replied. "Let her tell it herself." "I asked," Julie said. "She said you didn't like the way the house looked and you kicked her out." "That's bullshit, Julie, and you know it," Mike said. "If you want to know the truth, come to me, I'll show you." There was silence on the other end for a few moments. "Okay, Mike, I'll come, but it has to be something worthwhile," she said before hanging up. He knew it would be a while before she got to his house, so he sat down at his computer and turned it on. When the download finished, he decided to check Amy's email. Amy wasn't too smart about passwords and had one of those web-based email services, so he soon had access to her email. He decided to slow Amy down a bit and changed her password so she couldn't delete anything. He knew she would eventually restore access, but not until he had his proof. It only took him a few minutes to look through her letters and realize that this had been going on for quite some time, perhaps throughout his entire tour in Iraq. The letters were quite explicit, and many of them contained photographs or videos. By the time Julie arrived, he had printed almost a stack of letters and a whole stack of photographs. The videos were saved in a separate folder. he noticed that most of the photos and videos were of the same 6 men. He opened the door, making sure Julie was alone. She didn't look very happy. "Okay, Mike, tell me what's going on," she asked, her face red with anger. He pulled out his phone and showed her the photos. "This is what I saw when I returned home," he said. Her face turned pale when she saw the photographs. "Oh my God," she said. "That's not all," he said, throwing the photographs he found in Amy's mail onto the table. Julie looked at the photos, shocked. "Did you know about this?" he asked. Julie shook her head. "Honestly," she said, "I didn't know anything. I knew she went out often, but I didn't know about it." "She didn't tell you anything?" Mike asked. Julie shook her head. "There is nothing." "Oh my God, Mike, I'm so sorry," she said. "I knew that she was worried about your departure, but I didn't think that she was capable of such a thing." "Did she tell you anything about me being injured?" he asked. Julie shook her head. "Injured?" Julie was surprised. "When did it happen?" "About 6 months ago," he said. "I lost part of my leg. I was in surgery and rehabilitation for months and didn't hear a word from her. Now I know why." "Sorry, Mike, she didn't say anything about it. She hasn't mentioned you much in the past few months," Julie said. "Probably too busy to care," he said. "She didn't even recognize me when I walked in the door." "And what are you going to do?" asked Julie. "I'll divorce her," Mike said. "Is there any way to forgive her and get over this?" asked Julie. "Are you kidding?" Mike said. "I will never be able to get over this. And something tells me that this is just the tip of the iceberg. No, we're done." "I understand, Mike." "I'm really sorry," she said. "I'll tell her everything when I see her." She hugged him. "If you ever need anything, let me know, okay?" she asked before leaving. "Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it," he said. He locked the door after she left and went back to the computer to see what else he could find. By midnight, he had printed out all the incriminating letters and saved hundreds of photographs and videos. Looking through the timeline, he realized that Amy's infidelities began at the beginning of his first tour in Iraq and continued about once a week the entire time he was away. He also managed to identify all 6 men involved in her infidelities. He also found out that they were all active military personnel. From their letters, he was able to identify the divisions they belonged to and gain insight into their clubbing days. He also learned that all 6 of the men Amy cheated with were married, and some of them had young children. He wrote down their addresses and contact information. He was sorry that their families would suffer, but he wasn't going to let these bastards go unpunished just because they had children. He folded this information and lay down on the futon in his office to get some sleep. The next day, he had a very busy day ahead of him. He woke up before sunrise the next day and began his morning routine. After getting dressed, he outlined a plan of action for the day. The first step was to make an appointment with a good divorce lawyer. He looked through the phone book and started calling. After speaking with several firms, he was able to schedule an appointment for that morning. Looking at his watch, he realized that he had little time before the meeting, so he went to the bank and closed their joint accounts, opening a new one in his name. He knew he would probably have to give her half of their money, so he got a cashier's check for the full amount. His inheritance and trust fund were in accounts that Amy didn't have access to, so he left them untouched. He closed their joint credit card and applied for a new one in his name, paying off the balance on the other card. Having finished this, he went to his lawyer. Entering the office, he checked in with the secretary with a folder full of letters and photographs. He had barely poured himself a cup of coffee when an attractive woman approached him and introduced herself. "Mr. Johnson," she asked, holding out her hand. He shook her hand and introduced himself. "Please call me Mike," he said. She smiled and invited him into her office. "Thank you, Mike," she said. "Please call me Sally. I understand you want a divorce, right?" "Yes, that's right," he replied. She stared at him for several minutes. "You know, I don't represent the interests of cheating spouses," she said. Mike placed the folder on her desk. "Sally, I was in Iraq and was in the hospital for several months recovering from combat injuries," he said. "I am not the one who cheated, as these letters and photographs show. She looked at the folder, opened it, and leafed through the thick stack of papers, shaking her head. "Oh," she said, "this is extremely compromising. How did you receive these letters and photographs?" "Well," Mike said, "my future ex-wife used my computer for her correspondence, and they liked to send each other photos and videos." "Do you have a video?" she asked. "Yes, there is," Mike said, "and yesterday I found this at home." He took out his phone and showed photos he took in his house. Her eyes widened. They discussed the evidence and details of the divorce, and by the end of the meeting, Sally agreed to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, naming the 6 men Amy had been cheating with for the past 2 years. "So once we file, she'll be served with a summons and she'll have 30 days to respond," Sally said. "If she doesn't answer, we can get a final decision right away. If she contests it, it may take longer. Since the house was yours before marriage, she has no rights to it. The same goes for your inheritance and trust fund. If she wants to fight, we can use photos and videos. I hope she will just sign the paper and everything will be decided. We can serve her the summons at work or at her sister's apartment if she's there in a couple of days." "That would be great," Mike said. He thanked her and left the office feeling better than the first day he returned home. Once home, he called a locksmith to change the locks on the house and began calling the wives of the men Amy had cheated with. No wonder they were all furious. Most of them suspected that something was going on, but didn't know what. They all asked for proof, and Mike was happy to send photos and videos, as well as copies of some of the letters. He made a few more calls and met up with some of his mates at a bar on the outskirts of town. They looked at some of the photos he brought and shook their heads. They also knew the 6 men involved and discussed possible courses of action. While they were talking, one of the 6, a big lout named John Abrams, staggered into the bar. George, one of Mike's friends, pointed at him. They looked and returned to their beers, but not before he recognized Mike and, full of anger and alcohol, walked towards him. "Well, well," he said loudly, "if it's not Sergeant Johnson. How's your wife doing?" Mike said nothing, which only egged the dork on. "What, are you not only a cuckold, but also a coward? Come on, Big Ranger, show what you can do." There was a fight. Mike spent several hours in jail before an officer approached his cell and waved him out. "Today is your lucky day, soldier," said the officer. "Witnesses said you acted in self-defense, and the video surveillance confirmed it, so today you go home without charges." Mike returned home and went to bed. The next day, one of his friends called him. "Hey, did you see the news?" asked George. "No, I just woke up," Mike answered. "What's happened?" "Looks like there was a spike in attacks last night," George said. 5 soldiers ended up in the hospital with various injuries. It's in the newspaper. Isn't this terrible?" "Yeah, terrible news," Mike said sarcastically. "Any of our friends?" "Yes, these are the same 5 who slept with Amy," said George. "Isn't this an amazing coincidence?" "Yes, an amazing coincidence," Mike said, smiling. Later that day, Mike received a visit from his former regimental commander and sergeant major, the man who made Sam Elliott's character in We Were Soldiers look friendly by comparison. Mike opened the door and invited them in, offering them something to drink. "No, thank you, Sergeant," said the colonel. "We just wanted to stop by for a few minutes to see how things were going." "It might have been better, given the circumstances, Colonel," Mike said. "And please, call me Mike. I'm not a soldier anymore, thanks to this," he added, tapping his prosthetic. "I understand, and I apologize," said the colonel. "Not your fault, Colonel," Mike said. "You didn't plant that wide." Everyone laughed. "I understand that you are going through a divorce," the colonel said. "Your lawyer called me and said that your wife was associated with 6 active military personnel." "That's right, Colonel," Mike said. "I have their names, addresses, everything I need." "Want to?" "Yes, Mike, that would be useful," said the colonel. Mike went into his office and returned with a folder. He handed the colonel a sheet with the names and addresses of the men. "Do you want photos too?" Mike asked. "I have photos, videos, everything." They seemed to enjoy sending it to each other. And yes, they knew that she was my wife, and they deliberately did this while I was overseas in a combat zone. And yes, they are all married. You did a good job, said the colonel. Yes, sir, I did, Mike said. I also read a little and know that adultery is considered in Article 134, paragraph 62 of the Criminal Code of the Armed Forces. From what I have read, there are three main elements of evidence, and in my opinion, all 6 cases meet these elements. I understand, said the colonel. You are probably right, judging by what you said and showed. I will look into this and refer the matter to the JAG Judge Advocate Corps. If they agree, I think we can make a case for them to dismiss everyone in disgrace. Likewise, Colonel, Mike said, one of them attacked me last night in a bar. He ended up in the hospital. The colonel nodded. Personally, I would expect nothing less, but officially, you didn't hear that from me, he said, smiling. So, what are your plans for the future? Well, Colonel, I haven't had much time to think about it, Mike said. I have a degree in economics, but I don't think I'll ever be happy working at a desk. The colonel smiled. Why didn't you go to Ox officer school? With your track record, you would be an ideal candidate. My dad was a non-commissioned officer, and I always wanted to be where all the action was, Mike said. The colonel nodded, and the sergeant major smiled. I knew your father when he was a hand-to-hand combat instructor, the colonel said. Damn good man. I know he would be proud of you no matter what you decide to do. He stood up and put on his hat. Sergeant Major joined him. He extended his hand and Mike shook it. Take care of yourself, Sergeant, he said. If I can help with anything, let me know. Mike nodded. Thank you, Colonel, Sergeant Major, he said. He watched the 2 men leave. Mike spent the day doing chores around the house, mostly doing small things to avoid thinking about Amy. That evening, he opened a beer and spent the night watching TV, his thoughts wandering around his failed marriage. The next day, he received a call from Amy's place of work, informing him that she had been served with divorce papers. This is true? Asked a female voice. Mike recognized the voice. It was Amanda, one of Amy's friends at the law firm where she worked. He always thought she was very attractive and had beautiful legs, but he never said anything. Is it true? Mike asked. That she cheated on you while you were in Iraq, Amanda said. The employee serving the documents clearly said that the divorce was due to adultery. We've heard it all. Yes, that's true, Mike said. This went on for more than 2 years. And you didn't know anything? Asked Amanda. She only did this when I was in Iraq, Mike said. My God, you poor man, said Amanda. I am so sorry. Look, honey, if you need anything, just call, okay? I mean, whatever. We all feel very good about you, and we hate what she did to you. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it, Mike said. Later that day, he received a call from Linda Abrams, John Abrams' wife. Hey, Mike, she said. Do you have a couple of minutes to talk? Yes, of course, Mike answered. What's happened? Well, I found out about what my hubby did to you and Amy, and I want revenge, if that's okay, she said. Mike smiled. He knew Linda and thought she was a very beautiful woman. He couldn't understand why John cheated on her. He listened to her plan and smiled. This will be fun, he thought. When do you want to do it? He asked. Tonight, if you have time, she said. I want you to come around 4:30 or 5 p.m. so that I can feed dinner for you and prepare everything. Agreed, said Mike. See you tonight. A little later, Amy called him again. Mike, she sobbed, I was served with divorce papers today. Can't we work this out? I told you, this was the only time. It was an accident. Mike laughed. You stupid bitch, he growled. I know it was a lot more than one time. Just sign the papers, and it will all be over in a month. Otherwise, it could become very public, and you don't want that. Damn you, she said, changing her tone. I will fight you every step of the way. I will take your house and everything you have. I don't think so, bitch, he said. Call my lawyer and sign the damn papers. He hung up and blocked her number. That evening, he drove to Linda's and parked in the middle of their driveway as she had suggested. He knocked on the door, and she answered, wearing a short, ripped t-shirt and tiny, ripped shorts that showed off her butt. She hugged Mike and kissed him, clinging to him. "Do you like what you see, soldier?" she asked seductively. "God, yes," Mike replied. "You are wonderful. John was an idiot for cheating on you." "Yes, he was," she said, "and he'll soon realize how much of an idiot he was. Let's go, dinner is ready." Mike walked into the house and smelled a grilled steak. His mouth watered as he thought about what was about to happen. "This is delicious," Mike said after finishing the dinner Linda had prepared for him. "Wait until we get to dessert," she said. Taking his hand, she led him upstairs. "I'm home," John shouted from the living room. "Whose car is that in the driveway? I can't get into the garage." "Sorry, honey," Linda said. "I asked Mike Johnson to come and help me with something that was broken, and I didn't want to bother you at work. Could you come upstairs? We need your help." "Mike Johnson?" John asked, walking up the stairs. "Why did you call him?" "I just thought he might help." "You don't mind, right?" she asked. "No, I think not," he said, entering the bedroom. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted. "I found out that you and your buddies have been sleeping with Amy Johnson for the last 2 years or more, you bastard," she said. "I also know about your attack on Mike at the bar last week. So I decided to take revenge." She and Mike were engaged sex. She then took the envelope from her bedside table and dropped it into John's lap. "They handed it to you, bastard," she said. "Now pack your things and get out of here. I've already collected them for you. There's also a restraining order here, and you better obey it, or I'll have you locked up." "Understood." John nodded his head silently and took the bag and suitcase that Linda had prepared. Defeated, he left the house. After John left, Linda buried her head in Mike's shoulder and cried. He hugged her, kissing her head. "Everything will be fine," he said. She nodded her head. "It won't be easy, but I can do it," she said. "I've already split our bills, and with my job, I'll be able to cover the bills for a while, but eventually I'll have to sell the house." "Linda, if it comes to that, you can move in with me," Mike said. She nodded her head. "Thanks, Mike, I appreciate it," she said. "Please stay with me tonight," she begged. Mike agreed. Things didn't go very well with the divorce at first. Amy decided to fight, claiming that her infidelity was a one-off incident and an accident. A little over 6 weeks later, Sally called Mike, Amy, and her lawyer, Bill Green, to a conference in her office. They gathered in a conference room, and Amy's lawyer immediately began talking, suggesting they go to counseling to help Mike get over what he called Amy's one mistake. Sally shook her head and stopped Amy's lawyer. She pulled out a stack of letters and photographs and threw them on the table. Amy and her lawyer looked at the stack of paper, shocked. "Listen, Bill," Sally said. "Let's stop this nonsense, okay? My client has evidence in your client's words, photographs and videos of multiple parties with the same 6 men, spanning over 2 years. We estimate that your client did this more than 100 times while her husband was in Iraq. I have seen your client's sworn testimony, and I want to warn you that if you continue, we will have to charge your client with perjury and seek a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. Now, if you state your answer and your client signs Mr. Johnson's original offer, we will forget about perjury. What's your answer?" "Look, Sally," Bill said, "you know as well as I do that prosecutions for perjury in divorce cases are rare. Your threats won't work here." "Are you really willing to take the risk, Bill?" asked Sally. "It may be rare, but it happens. And with the evidence that we have, I think the judge will see this from our side." Bill shook his head. Mike leaned over to Sally and whispered something in her ear. She nodded her head before speaking again. "Why not do it this way?" said Sally. "My client says he would like to talk to Amy for a few minutes alone. He assures me that he won't go overboard. I suggest giving them this time to work things out." Bill listened to Amy speak quietly. After her words, he nodded. "Okay," he said, "but we'll be right outside the door." After they left, Amy looked at Mike. "Okay, what are you up to?" she said defiantly. Mike picked up a stack of letters and photos and began tossing the photos in front of her. Her eyes widened as he did this. He then pulled out a photograph from his wallet. "Do you know what helped me survive 2 tours in Iraq?" he asked. He pointed to a photograph, yellowed with age. It was made shortly before he entered the service. "This, and then, when I didn't hear anything from you, I started thinking the worst. I honestly thought you were hurt or worse. Then when I came home and found you cheating, I almost went crazy. You can imagine how I felt when I went into your mail and found all this. You could shoot me in the head. It would be more merciful." Amy started crying as he spoke. But he wasn't finished. He pulled out a letter which he had opened. He began to read the correspondence. "Hey, baby, did you solve that little problem?" He looked at her. "Then you replied, 'Yes, I went to the clinic yesterday. I should be fine for the party next week.'" He looked at her with hatred in his eyes. "You got rid of the pregnancy, Amy. Why? Why did you do this? Was I not good enough for you?" he asked. She shook her head. "You were good," she said, sobbing. "I just missed you so much, and when I met the guys at the club, they made me forget how much I missed you." "Well, you just destroyed 7 families, including ours. Do you understand that?" he asked. "You destroyed not only our family, but also theirs. Some of these guys had children. Did you know this?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't know," she said. "What did you think would happen when I returned? I will applaud and brag. What kind of woman of easy virtue are you?" he asked. She cried more and more. "I'm sorry," she said, sobbing. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, you did it," he said. "Look, I know the girls in your office hate you and what you did. I also know that 6 bastards are getting divorced and facing discharge from the military. I know they will all receive an unhonorable discharge, and it will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Besides, there are 6 very angry wives who hate you." He folded the papers back into the pile before looking at her again. "You know Sally will get criminal charges of perjury against you. In this state, it can get you up to 10 years in prison," he said, "and you'll probably never be able to work in a law firm again. Even if you get out easily, you'll probably have to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Believe me, these wives are very angry with you right now and would probably love to do to you what was done to their husbands." She looked at him in shock. "What are you saying, Mike?" she asked. "Are you threatening me? Did you have anything to do with the attacks on those guys?" "No, the only one I killed was that bastard John when he decided to make fun of me. And that was after he took a swing at me," Mike said. "I'm not threatening you, I'm just telling you the situation. Look, just sign the papers and end this now." "Can we ever be friends?" she asked. Mike shook his head. "I don't think so," he said. "After what you did, it will be a long time before I can be near you." She wiped her eyes after his words. She lowered her head, defeated. "Okay," she said quietly. Mike stood up and opened the door, letting the lawyers back in. "Well, have you come to an agreement?" asked Bill. Amy nodded her head. "Yes," she said. She looked at Sally. "I decided that I don't want alimony. Mike gets a small pension from the army, and he needs it. I earn enough to support myself. I just want to finish this." Mike was stunned. He didn't expect this. Sally nodded her head. "Okay," she said. "Let me make this change, and you will need to initial it." Bill looked at Amy, surprised. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Did he threaten you?" "No, Bill," she said. "I just want to finish this." Sally returned with the corrected documents and an assistant who was a notary. Mike and Amy signed everything they were told. She started sobbing as she signed the line that said she had to take back her maiden name. After they finished, Mike extended his hand. With tears in her eyes, Amy took off her rings and handed them to him. He took off his wedding ring and handed it to her. "Maybe you can be faithful to the next man you marry," he said. "You still have some things left in the house. If you want, I'll bring them on Saturday." "That will be good," Amy said. "Thank you." Sally and Bill stood up and shook hands. "I responded to my client's response, and I will meet you in court to file documents today," he said. Sally nodded her head. See you there, she said. Bill and Amy left the room and Mike collapsed in his chair, glad that it was finally over. Sally looked at him for a moment. What did you really tell her? She asked. Mike looked at her. I was just reminding her of the truth, he said, and the consequences of her actions. There are 7 families destroyed because of this. That's why I never represent traitors, she said. You're a good person, Mike Johnson. You will succeed. Just stay out of trouble, okay? He smiled. I'll try, Sally, he said. Thank you. He left the office and headed home, grabbing a pack of beer along the way. He called Linda's cell phone and told her the news. Come to me tonight, soldier, she said. I'll help you celebrate. I will, my dear, he said, smiling. On Saturday, Mike loaded up Amy's remaining belongings and headed to her sister's apartment where she lived. Julie opened the door when Mike rang. Hi, Mike, she said. I brought the rest of Amy's things, he said. Well, next time I see her, I'll get the address and send them, she said. What do you mean? Mike asked. Amy left, she said. She quit her job the day you signed the papers and left that night. I just packed my things and left. I don't know where she's going, but I think she's leaving the state. I see, Mike said. Well, if you talk to her, tell her I left her things. Julie took what Mike brought and thanked him. A few weeks later, Julie told Mike that Amy had moved to the other side of the country and was now living somewhere in Washington or Oregon. The 6 men she cheated with were fired from the dishonorable dismissal. They also left the area for an unknown destination. Mike wondered if he and Amy had teamed up again, but he didn't care. He married Linda shortly after their divorces were finalized. It turned out that she became pregnant the night they took revenge on John. They have since had 2 more children and are doing well. Mike got a job offer as a researcher for something called Task Force Homefront Security and is still working there. The job pays well, he has great benefits, and he has access to information that most people would kill for. The best thing is that he can work from home, although sometimes he has to fly to a place called Fort Apache. One day, he was looking through mail and opened a thick envelope when his work phone rang. Mike Johnson, he said, answering the phone. Hello, Mike. This is Oscar. How are you? Asked the person on the other end. Great, Oscar. How are you? Mike asked. I'm living a dream, said Oscar. Hey, I just wanted to thank you for your work on the Skaggs case. It was invaluable. Thanks, Mike said. Look, I know praise is rare in our business, but Bill wanted me to make sure you got tickets to Cancun, Oscar said. I got them today, Mike said. Great, said Oscar. I'll tell Bill. Make sure you and your beautiful wife have a good time, okay? Mike smiled. Oh yes, he said. We will definitely do this. Thanks again. He hung up and looked at the tickets. What good timing. Their anniversary was approaching, and he couldn't wait to see his wife in her new swimsuit on the beach. Oh yeah, he thought, they're really going to have a great time. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to